He stood there in silence, his eyes blank as if I was a stranger. I had just told him I was diagnosed with cancer, and I expected him to hold me, to say we'd get through it together. But instead, he said nothing. That silence was the loudest sound I'd ever heard in my life. That night, Ryan packed his bags. No goodbye. No explanation. Just the sound of the front door closing behind him. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the empty space he left. The man who once promised to love me, in sickness and in health, couldn't even stay for one night of fear. The days that followed felt endless. I remember sitting in the hospital waiting room, the smell of disinfectant everywhere, clutching my file while couples around me held hands. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I told myself crying wouldn't make him come back. Treatment was hard. Some days, I couldn't even lift my head. My best friend Lena became my family. She drove me to my chemo sessions, sat beside me when my hair started falling out, and made me laugh when I wanted to disappear. She was there when I found out Ryan had moved in with someone new, a woman from his office named Haley. That hurt more than the illness. Not just because he left, but because he replaced me so easily. While I fought for my life, he built a new one without me. I used to think love was unbreakable, that people showed their true selves in dark times. Turns out, darkness just reveals what was already missing. But as weeks turned into months, something inside me started changing. I stopped checking my phone, stopped wondering if he'd call. My world got smaller, but my strength grew. Every treatment, every painful day, I told myself I would get through this. Not for him, but for me. And I did. When the doctor finally said the words, "You're in remission," I cried for the first time in months. But not for what I'd lost. I cried for the woman who survived, the one who didn't need anyone to save her. I moved to a new city and started working with a cancer support foundation. Helping others gave me purpose again. Slowly, I rebuilt myself, piece by piece. 2 years later, I saw Ryan again. He didn't look like the man who left me. His hair was thinner, his shoulders slumped. When our eyes met, he said, "Emily, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel love either. I just felt done." He wanted forgiveness, maybe even a second chance. But the truth was, the woman standing in front of him wasn't the same one he left. I had healed, not just from the cancer, but from him. And that was something he could never take credit for. For 7 years, Emily and Ryan's life looked like a dream. They lived in a small but cozy house in Columbus, Ohio. Ryan worked in marketing, and Emily was a high school English teacher. They weren't rich, but they were happy. Their mornings started with coffee on the porch, and their evenings ended with quiet dinners and laughter over small things. Ryan always called her his lucky charm. Whenever he got a promotion or landed a big project, he'd say it was because of her support. Emily believed it too. She stood by him through long work hours, late nights, and stress. She thought love was about being a team, and for a long time, it felt like they really were one. They talked about buying a lake house someday, a peaceful place where they could raise their future kids. On weekends, they'd drive to different neighborhoods just to look at houses they couldn't afford yet, laughing and dreaming together. Emily loved how Ryan would wrap his arm around her and say, "One day, Em, we'll make it happen." Her friends often told her how lucky she was to have him. He was charming, confident, and always knew what to say. At parties, he'd make everyone laugh, and Emily would watch him with pride, thinking she had truly found her forever person. They didn't fight much, and even when they did, Ryan was quick to make peace. Life felt simple, predictable, and safe. Emily had built her world around Ryan. Every plan, every dream had his name in it. She trusted him completely. Not once did she imagine he could ever walk away. They had built memories together. Road trips, birthdays, quiet movie nights, and handwritten anniversary notes. He made her feel seen and loved, and she never doubted his promises. But as time passed, she started noticing small changes. Things that didn't mean much at first. Ryan seemed distracted, often glued to his phone. He worked longer hours and came home tired, claiming he was exhausted from meetings. Emily brushed it off, thinking it was just part of adult life. She never wanted to be the kind of wife who doubted her husband. Still, something felt off. The warmth between them was fading, replaced by silence at dinner and short answers. When she asked if everything was okay, he would just smile and say, "I'm fine, Em. Don't worry so much." And because she trusted him, she didn't push. She had no idea that their perfect little world was already cracking underneath. It all started one morning when she woke up feeling dizzy and weak. At first, she thought it was stress or maybe lack of sleep. But when it kept happening, she decided to see a doctor, just to be safe. She didn't tell Ryan right away. She didn't want to worry him over something small. That one simple hospital visit, meant only for reassurance, turned into the beginning of the end. The test results that day didn't just change her life. They revealed the truth about the man she thought she knew. The day Emily got her diagnosis felt unreal. She sat in the small hospital room, staring at the doctor's lips as he said the words stage 2 breast cancer. Everything around her blurred, the sound of papers shuffling, the faint hum of machines, the ticking clock. She felt numb. Her mind went blank except for one thought. How am I going to tell Ryan? When she got home, Ryan was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. Ryan, I went to the doctor today. They found something. It's cancer. He froze for a second, then looked at her like she'd just said something that didn't make sense. There was no hug, no we'll get through this. Just silence. After a long pause, he muttered, Are you sure? Maybe they made a mistake. Emily tried to smile weakly and said, No, they're sure. But it's treatable. The doctor said there's a good chance I'll be fine. She expected him to comfort her, to tell her he'd be by her side. Instead, he nodded slowly and said, I need some time to think. Then he got up and went to their bedroom, leaving her standing there in the kitchen, holding back tears. The next few days were quiet, painfully quiet. Ryan barely spoke. He avoided eye contact, leaving early for work and coming home late. Emily pretended not to notice the growing distance. She tried to make dinner, tried to talk about her upcoming treatment, but he would change the subject or just walk away. One night, she couldn't take it anymore. She found him sitting alone in the living room, staring at the wall. Ryan, she said softly, I need you. I can't do this alone. He didn't look up. I can't live like this, Emily, he finally said. I'm not built for hospitals and pity. I can't watch you go through that. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard him. What do you mean you can't? She asked. Her voice trembled, but his didn't. He sighed and stood up, his eyes cold and distant. I'm sorry. I just can't handle it. She wanted to scream, to ask him how he could say that when she needed him most. But no words came out. She just stood there, frozen, as he walked past her. That night, she heard the sound of a suitcase being zipped. The front door opened and closed quietly, like he was afraid of being caught. Emily sat on the bed, staring at the wall, waiting for the sound of his car starting. When it did, she knew he wasn't coming back. There was no note, no goodbye, just the echo of an engine fading into the night. In the days that followed, Emily kept expecting him to call. She told herself maybe he just needed time. But as the silence stretched on, she understood. The man she loved had left her the moment life stopped being easy. The days after Ryan left felt like walking through fog. Emily woke up every morning hoping it had all been a nightmare, but the empty side of the bed reminded her it was real. She tried calling him a few times in the first week, but he never answered. After that, she stopped trying. She realized she couldn't beg someone to care. Her treatment started soon after. The first chemotherapy session hit her hard. The nurses were kind, but nothing could prepare her for the sickness, the dizziness, and the bone-deep exhaustion. She used to picture Ryan sitting beside her, holding her hand through it, but instead she sat there alone, staring at the white walls and pretending she was fine. Her best friend, Lena, became the only person she could rely on. Lena drove her to every appointment, made sure she ate, and even stayed overnight when Emily was too weak to get out of bed. Emily didn't know how to thank her. Sometimes she cried quietly at night, not because of the pain, but because someone who wasn't her husband showed her more love than he ever did. Weeks passed, and the treatments got worse. Her hair started falling out. The first time she saw strands of it on her pillow, she broke down. She stood in front of the mirror for a long time, staring at herself, pale skin, tired eyes, shaking hands. She didn't recognize the woman looking back. One afternoon, Lena came over with groceries and some news she'd been dreading to share. She hesitated, but Emily could tell something was wrong. She said softly. I don't know how to say this, but Ryan's seeing someone. Her name's Haley. She works at his office. For a moment, Emily couldn't breathe. The air felt heavy, pressing on her chest. She whispered, So he moved on already? Lena nodded. He moved in with her a few weeks ago. That was the moment the pain inside Emily changed. It wasn't just heartbreak anymore. It was betrayal. The man who promised to love her through everything didn't just leave. He replaced her before she even finished her first round of chemo. At first, she thought she would never recover from it. Every time she saw a couple walking hand in hand, her stomach twisted. Every time she looked at her wedding ring, she wanted to throw it away. But in the quiet nights, when the tears finally stopped, a new kind of strength began to grow. She made herself a promise. She whispered it to the dark one night after a long treatment. If I survive this, I'll never need anyone again. From that day forward, she stopped waiting for anyone to save her. She drove herself to the clinic when she could. She learned to make soup when she felt too weak to stand. She started reading again, writing small notes of hope in a journal. The world that once fell apart around her started to rebuild, slowly, quietly, piece by piece. But this time, it would be hers alone. Months passed, and the hospital visits slowly became less frequent. One morning, Emily sat across from her doctor, waiting for the results she'd been dreading and hoping for at the same time. The doctor smiled and said the words she had prayed to hear. You're in remission. For a moment, Emily couldn't speak. She just sat there, her eyes filling with tears. The fight that had almost broken her was finally over. She walked out of the hospital into the sunlight, feeling it warm her face, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel weak. She felt alive. She decided she couldn't stay in the same city where every street reminded her of Ryan, the restaurants they used to visit, the park where they talked about their future, the house they once called home. So she packed her things, sold the house, and moved to a small apartment in Cleveland. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and it felt like a clean start. Emily didn't want to go back to teaching. The experience had changed her too deeply. She wanted to do something meaningful, something that mattered. After some searching, she got a job at a cancer support foundation. Her role was to help women who were just beginning the battle she had already fought. Listening to their stories made her realize how far she had come. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was helping others survive too. The work gave her purpose. Each day, she met women who were scared, lost, and lonely, just as she once was. She sat beside them during treatments, shared her story, and reminded them that hope was real. In their gratitude, she found healing. Slowly, the heaviness she had carried began to fade. She started smiling again, not the forced smile she used to wear, but one that came from a place of peace. Lena visited often. They would sit on Emily's small balcony with coffee, talking about life. One evening, Lena showed her something on her phone, pictures of Ryan and Haley. They were traveling, eating at fancy restaurants, posing in new cars. For a second, Emily felt a sharp sting in her chest, but it passed quickly. She realized she didn't envy them. She just felt nothing. But as time went by, Lena mentioned that people were starting to talk. There were rumors that Ryan had lost his job. Apparently, Haley wasn't as loyal as she seemed either. She had started seeing someone else, someone wealthier. Emily listened quietly, not saying much. She didn't laugh or gloat. She just nodded and said, "I hope he learned something from." And she meant it. That night, she stood by her window, watching the city lights. She thought about how much had changed, how much she had changed. The woman who once felt broken and abandoned was now standing on her own feet, helping others find their strength. The pain that once defined her had turned into purpose. And even though she didn't know what the future held, she finally felt ready to live it, on her own terms. Time moved on, and Emily's life slowly found balance again. Her work at the foundation was going well, and her dedication didn't go unnoticed. She was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. Every patient she helped reminded her of her own journey, and that made her care even more deeply. Her boss often told her, "You have a gift, Em. People feel safe with you." Then, one morning, she was called into the director's office. Her boss smiled and said, "Emily, we've seen how much you've done for this organization. We'd like to promote you to Director of Patient Services." For a few seconds, she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Tears filled her eyes as she thanked him. This wasn't just a job to her. It was proof that she had rebuilt her life from the ground up. While Emily was climbing higher, Ryan's life was going the other way. Lena heard bits and pieces through mutual friends, and though Emily never asked, the stories found their way to her anyway. Ryan had lost his job after an internal scandal at his company. No one knew the full details, but rumors said it had something to do with misuse of company funds. He tried to deny it, but eventually the company let him go. Haley, who once seemed proud to show him off, started pulling away. She had loved the lifestyle, the nice dinners, the trips, the attention. But when the money dried up and the stress began, she changed. She found out Ryan was in serious debt and had been hiding it from her. The fights grew louder, and one day she packed her things and left. Ryan tried to reach out to old friends, but most had distanced themselves. Without a job, his savings started disappearing fast. He sold his car, moved out of his fancy apartment, and rented a small place on the outskirts of town. Emily didn't know every detail, but she sensed that life had come full circle. She wasn't one to celebrate someone else's downfall, but she couldn't ignore the quiet sense of justice. The man who once abandoned her in her weakest moment was now facing his own. And unlike her, he didn't have anyone by his side. At work, Emily focused on her patients and her team. She had built something solid, something real. She no longer thought about the past with anger. It felt distant, like a chapter from another lifetime. Sometimes, when she was alone in her office, she'd think about how strange life was. You could pour your heart into someone, and they could still walk away. But somehow, the universe had a way of balancing things out. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need to prove anything. Just living peacefully, doing what she loved, and standing tall after everything. That was enough. Life had flipped the script, and she didn't have to lift a finger. 2 years had passed since Emily had last seen Ryan. Life had finally settled into a peaceful rhythm. Her days were busy with work, helping patients, mentoring new staff, and visiting hospitals across the city. She rarely thought about him anymore. To her, he was a closed chapter, a painful memory that had lost its sting. One afternoon, she was reviewing patient files in the hospital office when a nurse knocked on. "Emily, there's someone here asking for you," the nurse said softly. "He says he knows you personally." Emily looked up, slightly confused. "Who is it?" she asked. The nurse hesitated for a second before replying. "His name's Ryan Carter." For a moment, Emily froze. She hadn't heard that name spoken out loud in years. Her hands went still, the papers forgotten on her desk. "You can send him in," she finally said, her voice calm even though her heart was pounding. When Ryan walked through the door, she barely recognized him. The confident man she once knew was gone. He looked thinner, older, worn down. His clothes were wrinkled, and his face carried deep lines of exhaustion. His eyes, once full of charm, looked empty. He tried to smile but couldn't hold it. "Emily, hi," he said quietly. "You look different." She nodded, her expression neutral. "It's been a long time, Ryan. What brings you here?" He looked down, ashamed. "I didn't know you worked here. I came for treatment." He took a deep breath. "I had an accident a few months ago. My leg hasn't healed right, and I don't have insurance anymore. I was hoping to get some help with the bills." The irony hit Emily immediately. The man who once said he couldn't live around hospitals was now sitting in one, asking for help. She almost couldn't believe it. Life had come back around in a way even she couldn't have written. Ryan kept talking, his voice shaky. "I know I don't deserve your time, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I was scared back then, and I ran. You didn't deserve that. I've paid for it every day since." Emily stayed quiet for a moment, studying him. There was no anger left in her, just a calm distance. "I'm sorry for what you're going through," she said softly, "but I can't help you personally. I can refer you to someone from our financial aid department." He nodded, his eyes glassy. "Thank you," he whispered. "I didn't come expecting much. I just wanted you to know I regret everything." Emily stood up, ready to leave. "Ryan," she said gently, "we all face what we put into the world sooner or later. I hope you find peace." As she walked away, she realized her hands weren't shaking. She didn't feel pity or satisfaction, just closure. The man who had once left her to face her worst pain alone was now facing his own, and she didn't need revenge. Life had already taken care of that. The next day, Emily saw Ryan again. He had asked if they could talk somewhere private, and she agreed to meet him in the hospital cafeteria during her lunch break. Part of her wanted to avoid it, but another part of her knew she needed to close this chapter properly. When she walked in, Ryan was already sitting at a corner table. He looked nervous, his hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold. When he saw her, he stood up quickly. "Thanks for meeting me," he said. Emily sat across from him and nodded. "You said you wanted to talk. Go ahead." He took a deep breath. "I just want to explain, not to justify what I did, but so you understand. When you got sick, I didn't know how to handle it. I was scared, Emily. I'd never seen anyone go through something like that. It broke me. I felt helpless, and instead of staying, I ran. It was wrong, but I didn't know what else to do." She listened quietly, her expression calm. She didn't interrupt. She'd waited years for an apology, but now that it was here, it didn't give her the relief she thought it would. After a moment of silence, she said softly, "You didn't leave because you were scared of cancer, Ryan. You left because you were scared of love when it stopped being easy." Ryan looked down, his eyes filling with tears. "You're right," he said in a broken voice. "I was selfish. I didn't think about what you needed. I only thought about myself, and I've paid for it every single day." Emily stayed quiet. His words didn't move her like they once would have. She had cried all her tears long ago. He reached across the table, his voice trembling. "Emily, I've changed. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but if there's any chance you could forgive me, or maybe even give me another chance, I'd do anything to make it right." She looked at his hand resting on the table, but didn't take it. For a long second, she just stared at him. Then she gave a small, gentle smile, not out of affection, but out of understanding. "Ryan," she said quietly, "I forgave you a long time ago. Not for you, for me. I didn't want your choices to keep poisoning my peace. But a second chance? That's not something I can give. The person you left behind doesn't exist anymore." Her voice was calm but firm. Her eyes, though soft, carried the strength of someone who had rebuilt herself from ashes. Ryan wiped his face, unable to meet her gaze. "I get it," he said. "I just wanted to say sorry while I still could." Emily stood up and placed her hand gently on the table. "I hope you find the strength to forgive yourself too," she said before walking away. As she left the cafeteria, she felt light, not because she'd hurt him, but because she finally realized she didn't need anything from him anymore. Closure had come not through revenge or anger, but through peace. After their meeting in the cafeteria, Emily went back to her office feeling calm. The conversation hadn't shaken her like she once feared it would. She had faced him, listened to his apology, and walked away without anger. It felt final, like a door quietly closing for good. A few days later, Ryan came to her office again, this time for help with his medical bills. His injury required long-term therapy, and without insurance or a job, he couldn't afford the costs. He looked uncomfortable as he spoke, his pride clearly fighting with his need for help. "Emily," he said softly, "I know it's asking a lot, but is there any way your foundation can help me? I don't expect special treatment. I just don't know where else to turn." Emily listened carefully, keeping her tone professional. "I can refer you to one of our financial counselors," she said. "They'll go through your case and see what kind of assistance you qualify for." She wrote down a name and handed it to him. He looked at the note and then at her, as if expecting more. Maybe he thought she'd offer to personally handle it or make an exception. But she didn't. Her face stayed calm, polite but distant. "They'll contact you soon," she added. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice heavy with shame. Emily nodded and stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "Take care of yourself, Ryan." Then she turned and walked out of the room without looking back. There was no drama, no cruel words, no satisfaction in watching him struggle. Her revenge wasn't loud. It was in her peace, her silence, and the simple fact that she had built a life so strong that his presence could no longer touch it. Weeks later, Emily heard from one of her colleagues that Ryan's financial aid application had been reviewed and ultimately denied. The reason was simple. The foundation's budget was limited, and his case didn't qualify under the current guideline. What Ryan didn't realize, until later, was that the foundation that made that decision was the very same one Emily now ran. She was the director, the final authority on the process. But Emily hadn't interfered. She hadn't even looked at his file. The system had made the decision on its own. When he found out, it hit him like a wave. The woman he had once left to face her worst fear alone was now in charge of the place he had turned to for help. He sat in his small apartment later that night, holding the letter of denial, realizing the full weight of it. Life had come full circle. Meanwhile, Emily was finishing her workday, completely unaware that he had learned the truth. She was focused on planning a new support program for women just starting treatment. Her world no longer revolved around pain or the past. Her revenge hadn't been about making him suffer. It had been about becoming untouchable. And in her quiet, graceful way, she had done exactly that. Months passed, and life began to move quietly again. Emily's days were filled with purpose. Meetings, patience, laughter echoing through the foundation's halls. Every once in a while, she'd catch her reflection in the glass walls of her office and barely recognize the woman staring back. She wasn't the fragile version of herself anymore. She was steady, strong, and deeply at peace. One late afternoon, as the sun began to set over the city, Emily stood by her window watching the golden light spill across the streets below. It was one of those rare, still moments when everything felt balanced. She thought about the journey, the fear, the loneliness, the betrayal, and how far she'd come from that hospital bed where it all began. Her body still carried the reminders of the fight she had survived. Faint scars, moments of fatigue that sometimes crept up unexpectedly. But they didn't weaken her anymore. They told her story, a story of survival, courage, and the kind of strength that only comes from being broken and rebuilding yourself piece by piece. Ryan had drifted out of her thoughts long ago. She hadn't seen him since that last meeting at the hospital. Lena had mentioned once that he'd left town, trying to start fresh somewhere else. Emily didn't ask for details. It no longer mattered. She had stopped needing answers from him. She had already given herself everything he could not. As she watched people walking below, Emily smiled softly. She thought about the women she worked with every day, women who came in scared, just as she once was, unsure if they could make it through. And every time she helped one of them find hope again, it felt like a small piece of her own healing was renewed. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "You don't always get to watch karma work, but when you do, it's worth every tear." The words hung in the air like a quiet truth. She didn't say them with bitterness or pride, just a calm acceptance. Life had balanced itself in ways she never could have planned. Karma hadn't needed her help. It had simply done its job. She turned back to her desk, glancing at a photo of her and Lena from a recent charity event. Both were smiling wide, full of light. That smile was real now, not the forced kind she used to wear to hide her pain. Emily picked up her coffee mug, took a sip, and opened her laptop to finish some reports. The work felt meaningful, grounding. It reminded her that her story didn't end with heartbreak. It began with survival. Outside, the last bit of sunlight faded, leaving the world wrapped in soft evening calm. Emily felt no anger, no sadness, only gratitude. She had lost everything once, but in return, she had found herself. And that was the kind of ending that didn't need anyone's apology, just peace.